Andrew Lemming, thank you for coming on the show. The Queensland Treasurer, Stephen Miles, says your comments are grubby and disgusting. What's your response to his comments back to you, and what's been the response you've got from your Brisbane community?
Well, the State Health Minister's job in Queensland is to close the gap. It's my job as well, Peter, and we're trying to make sure that in our era we've made some progress here. And I'm a little concerned in that post over the weekend that we are becoming increasingly distracted, if not completely diverted, by focusing on January the 26th. I mean, this has been around since 1988. It's not Anzac Day, but it is a time when Australians typically just get together with friends and have a barbecue and some fireworks on TV. It's not an Anzac Day, so to speak, but to tear away at it before we're doing the hard work and answering hard questions, I think, will be detrimental to Indigenous children in remote Australia.
Yeah, I made the point at the top of the show with some journalists who were talking about the ABC and their online use of the term Invasion Day. It would be a good thing if media outlets and politicians and commentators spent as much time throughout the year talking about Indigenous issues as we seem to do in and around Australia Day, certainly in recent years. I have just the sense of it, and it shows in today's poll, that even when people don't want the date changed, and a vast majority of Australians don't, they fear the left just won't go away on this issue, that they will just keep it up. They will wear us down to the point that those who don't want change will just say, you know, look, let's just get it off the agenda, let's move the date. What do you say to that argument?
Well, I've conceded some ground here, Peter. On reflection, something like a national day really does have to be broadly embraced, and it's fair to say that up until now, our decision at the bicentenary year of 1988 to start Australia Day really wasn't all-inclusive at the time, and we're an incredibly plural society, and it has to be, including everyone. My view as a smaller Liberal is that anyone can celebrate Australia's history at any time, on any day, however they choose, and one person's invasion is another person's arrival. In the end, we do have to absorb and incorporate all sentiments. It's not going to be easy, but it's something we should do in parallel with, as you know well, some of these really hard questions around domestic violence, getting kids into school, attending and succeeding, and then, of course, restructuring the original kinship groups that allowed Indigenous people to walk in two worlds confidently. And finally, we need, in remote Australia, more than just welfare paid in and it all spent on consumable external goods. We actually need a service economy thriving in Indigenous Australia. It's not there yet. And Indigenous Australians can be more than artists and rangers. And they don't all want to do those two jobs. So we need them to diversify and to actually enter the private sector, pay their tax like everyone else. And then suddenly, of course, all these opportunities that they've never had available before at community level become possible.
I mentioned at the top of the show too, you know, $30 billion we all pay in our taxes every single year. I don't begrudge it. If I thought it would actually not get wasted, which I fear a lot of it goes to the Aboriginal industry, the economy of the activists and others, I would be happy to pay more. And I know a lot of people can, but I can afford to pay more if it actually made a real difference. But I mean, unlike you, I've been to these remote communities. I've seen pretty horrendous living conditions. I know how much money's poured in. Why is the money not hitting the ground? And why do we accept a standard of living in Indigenous communities that we wouldn't accept in Brisbane suburbs or the Melbourne suburbs?
So I've outlined these three key points. It starts with getting children into school, and then it starts by relooking at welfare so that it supports kinship structures, senior men and women, rather than undermining them. And then lastly, of course, you need a service economy. If you can drive into remote Australia, you won't find services delivered by by these Australian communities. They are predominantly doing public work with public money. And when that happens, of course, we all know you don't get the best outcomes. Functional economies have about 1/5 of the money spent in public services. And we can't run at 100%. You actually have to have a private sector, deliver services, and of course be producing goods that other people want. And we've always avoided these hard questions, and then we wonder why things haven't changed 15 years after the apology.
But just on domestic violence, why am I, you know, twice as likely if I was an Indigenous woman in an Indigenous community likely to get beaten up by my partner or someone close to my kin group than I am a white woman living in Melbourne? Why do we allow that to happen? Why don't we talk about it enough?
So, Peter, first of all, there's a law enforcement issue. There's a belief that traditional law should sort this out, which, of course, some believe should happen simultaneously and in parallel. But fundamentally, it's alcohol. And I think the West has had centuries to get used to the notion that you work and then have a drink. What we haven't really got to the bottom of is that if you don't work and you're actually doing nothing, you still have the right to drink. And that is a fundamental alcohol piece which we've never been able to address, and many governments have tried. But look, I've worked for a small number of years in Indigenous Australia, and in that time it was clear to me the cycle breaks when you get kids into school and staying there. You need senior men and women empowered to keep them there. And finally, those graduates actually start entering not just Australia's economy, but they become part of the global economy. And let's face it, you can't dodge the global reality that you have to be producing in order to consume.
Yeah, but I mean, I've spent 16 years in and around federal politics, Andrew, and like you, I've been to a lot of these communities. I've been to communities every state and territory. My sister works in remote Aboriginal communities as a health worker. It doesn't change. You can go out there, you can see what needs to be done, and all you hear come days like this is the rhetoric of symbolism and not enough practical stuff on the ground. Here's a comment from Ken White in relation to Australia Day today.
The term is used by Indigenous Australians, but it should not be interchangeable. That diminishes the celebratory element of Australia Day and what we are as a nation. Look, I think if it's used respectfully to make the point of what has happened and some of the travesties that have occurred and the pain that's been created. But what we should be doing is reflecting back on what happened then and what we have achieved and how we've moved forward.
And of course, Andrew Laming also recognising all the wonderful achievements Australia has had alongside Migrant Australia, Indigenous Australia, and European settlement that brought the modern world to an ancient land and an ancient people.
Peter, I mean, Ken White is such a considered thinker, and you can see that he's trying to brook both of these points of view. Look, I differ from my colleagues slightly, and that is that, one person's arrival's another's invasion, and this language is here to stay. Politicians won't be able to shut it down, national broadcasters won't be able to either, so we have to engage it. I'll put for what it's worth the idea that we may broaden Australia Day to an Australia Week. We may well be able to celebrate really critical elements of Australia, like women and others, around the same time. But I don't think we need to be strong-arming people into January 26, and we need to also accept that this was a conception from a couple of decades ago. It's not like Anzac Day.
All right, Andrew Laming, thank you for your entree into this debate. More voices is better. We're not about shutting down voices on this network, certainly, and it's good to have you in the debate. Thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.